In terms of video games, the value of a dollar is a bit of a difficult thing to pin down, isn't it? When considering what is worth it to you, do you consider length? Do you consider fun value? What does that even mean? Do you consider the amount of modes or content available in the game? Does an open world constitute more money for you, or does a linear experience mean the game should cost less? I imagine we have all had our determined, consciously or not, reasons and judgments about what is worth your money in a video game. I used to naively think that most of my value judgment could be compressed into hours spent playing the game. For example, if I spent $20 on a game, I would expect to get at least 10 hours of gameplay time out of that. For a full $60, I would be expecting a 30-hour opportunity. You get the math. I don't believe this anymore. To be honest, I'm not sure I could even write down my criteria for value in a game. I know, however, that my over 1,200 hours, and you heard that right, in Counter-Strike Global Offensive is not at all the same type of hours I got from, say, BioShock. I bring this up because I can't do an analysis of Machine Games' new 2017 release, Wolfenstein: The New Colossus, without framing it in this question of value in video games. Was this game worth its release price of $60? I had no issue paying that. The previous game, The New Order, was one of my favorite releases of the last couple years. Would adding a lot of filler to give it more runtime make the experience longer but worse? Is the 12 hours I got from Wolfenstein: The New Colossus worth the same as the near 100 I got from Fallout 4? I mean, I paid the same for both. The New Colossus was one of the most exciting, grin-inducing, absurd rides of fiction I have ever been able to be a part of. But I can't help but shake this feeling that I just wanted more. I really shouldn't do these sort of analysis videos over games that I'm this excited for, because to this day, I'm not sure I got the sort of value I was looking for. So, did I like it? Yeah, I did. I admire these games to an almost weird degree. I think they're necessary narrative experiences in video games. The camp and the absurd self-referential irony is so clever, and the art direction of these games are almost without counterpart. I'm not sure I loved it like I loved The New Order, however. I wonder if this opinion is shared. We'll go into this, of course, but I'm not sure that the game nails the dark, sort of black humor like the previous games do. Even the returning characters lack some of the same traits they had in the previous game. It's this weird tonal shift that makes the entire game feel much different than the previous game. And while this is the third game of Machine Games' foray into the Wolfenstein universe, it is, in a lot of ways, the second. Wolfenstein: The New Colossus is a direct sequel to The New Order. And when I talk about a tonal shift, note as we go through it how the game turns away from apocalyptic dystopia black comedy to just a shock value comedy. Pay attention to the game's attempt to avoid nuance. And let's make one thing clear before we delve deep into this deceptively rich game. This is a game about killing Nazis. A game about shooting Nazis, stabbing Nazis, exploding Nazis, burning Nazis, axing Nazis, that's a new one, and destroying Nazis. Furthermore, this is a game that is wrought with a wider cultural context, a subtext that has essentially become the text itself. Machine Games has fully embraced the relevance of this game to today's environment, and so too should we when analyzing it. This game is a wild trip that I'm sad I had to get off. It's not perfect, but I can't picture any other way it could be a Wolfenstein game. Finally, I think it should not be understated that this is a single-player AAA experience that is developed without multiplayer, microtransactions, or some tacked-on open world. This sounds like I'm pandering, I know, due to the whole backlash, but I just think it should be recognized for what it is, a brave deviation from the standard norm. With game studios downsizing and going towards this golden goose of games as service, we should celebrate Machine Games for asking a price from you, the consumer, and not begging for more. For this video, I played through the game with the Fergus timeline. I played and completed the game on the PC and on the I Am Death Incarnate difficulty. It's the hardest difficulty of the 6 given. Well, I guess besides the permadeath one, but there's no way that's possible. I refuse to believe it. I did not complete the game 100% like I did The New Order, mainly because there are a lot more collectibles in this one, and I wanted to get the video out. I did do almost everything I could and certainly took my time exploring every nook and cranny. This game was loads of fun. Okay, yeah, I mean, I obviously liked it. If you can't tell that now, then I don't know what else to say. I don't know if I liked it more than the New Order, though. Sorry if that's a bit of a spoiler, but it certainly felt a little less focused and strong as the first entry. And I think it has everything to do with the characters, so pay attention to that as we go through. Where the New Order succeeded in introducing new characters, the new Colossus's new characters just don't hold up in comparison. You see, the thing is, each character is essentially hyperbole. They're exaggerations of certain character traits and types of people. The new Colossus takes this to the extreme to create characters that are more caricatures rather than characters. Obviously, we are going to cover a lot more than just the question of value in this video game, but it is important to understand before I start gushing about this game. If my main video game philosophical hang-up about the New Order was why it had to be so violent, then my hang-up for this game has to be, why did it have to be so short? If you are new to the channel or unfamiliar with this game, I would really encourage you to watch my video on the New Order before watching this. It covers a lot of the elements of the world and characters, and especially the gameplay, that I won't be talking about here for risk of repetition. I will also be referencing the video often in this video. I can't stress enough how much I will be glossing over in terms of context simply because I expect you to know from the previous video. For these analyses, I like to observe, identify, and unpack the most interesting elements of the game's story, gameplay, and theme. We're going to look at how Machine Games creates a world that juggles absurdity with depressing realism, hope with cynicism, and fun with profoundly unfun settings. This video will act as a couple things, the first being a reasonable summary of the story and its best elements. We look at the story so that it can contextualize our reading of the game, as well as give those who have not played the game an opportunity to listen and see BJ's story unfold. The second will be a more thorough and precise examination of what the game is trying to accomplish thematically and rhetorically. Specifically with this game, its role in a wider cultural context is vital to understanding it. Finally, we will look at the gameplay and how it contributes, if at all, to any of these readings. Because this game just came out, the last bit will also act as a bit of a review from my end. I've never really done that before. Remember, timestamps will be in the description, and I encourage you to take the video in chunks if you gotta. This game is also very violent and gruesome. Be wary. Finally, this is your official spoiler warning, so let's hop into the story. I want to make a couple things clear before I get into the nitty-gritty here. I think the direction of these cutscenes is phenomenal, and it's far and away one of my favorite aspects of the title. This game absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, excels in its setting, narrative, and characters. That being said, as we progress through the analysis and the summary of the story, I will go ahead and show some of my favorite parts of the cinematic cutscenes. Part of me doing this is in a way celebrating the excellence of the art direction from the people at Machine Games. It truly wields this camp, absurdity, fun, dread, humor, and depression in such an interesting and digestible way. If you play the game or are not interested in seeing the story, timestamps are in the description. This is, for all intents and purposes, a book report and summary with my interpretations and commentary interspersed. Let's go. The game starts right after the events of the New Order. BJ was ostensibly dead, but his squad mates came by and squeak him out before the bomb explodes. His body is badly broken and bruised, almost paralyzed from the waist down. This is pretty important to our understanding of BJ as a character in this title, so remember his, physical ailments. While you are dying, you remember growing up as a child. You have an abusive dad who yells at you for playing outside with your friend Billy. Why? Well, because she is black. Yeah. Add raging racist to BJ's dad's character sheet. Then he makes you shoot your dog to toughen you up. This game is heavily steeped in these Oedipal themes, giving context to a lot of why BJ is so, machismo. His masculinity isn't natural to him, it's forced upon him, cascading over him regardless if he wants it or not. It's why it makes sense that he can juggle his sensitive side and his absurdly abrasive side. Stoic indifference doesn't come naturally to BJ. I gotta say though, I was not expecting this game to start out so gosh darn dark. The game balances between serious and fun most of the time, but I can't think of a time where the game embraces these kind of themes. We will cover this more in depth for sure. BJ wakes up in a submarine that the Kreisau Circle, the name of your resistance group headed by Caroline Becker from the first game, took between the first game and now. BJ has been incapacitated and in bed for 5 months. He is old. He is weak. He crashes to the floor upon getting out of bed and crawls into a wheelchair. What ensues is pretty unique and a special approach to starting a game. You've probably already seen this. You are weakened, your health is half its old capacity, and your movement system is completely changed. It takes longer to pull out your weapons from a seated position because you are in a wheelchair. You can feel the wheelchair swiftly accelerate, then slow down, then swiftly accelerate again as your hands move back to the wheels to push them. It's an extraordinarily detailed polish to a gameplay mechanic that only stays for this mission. You reunite with Set Roth from the first game, and then your Polish lover Anya, who is pregnant with twins. As you progress through the subboat, which is of course being attacked by Nazis, you come outside and notice a giant ship has latched onto your sub and is taking it out of the water, in what is a pretty tremendous visual spectacle. Both Caroline and, for me, Fergus, are taken aboard Frau Irene Engel's main mother ship. You get yourself captured and join them up there for what will act as the main framing motivation for a lot of the story. I will reiterate my spoiler warning now. There's no coming back from here. Frau berates and fat shames her daughter Sigrun for being too fat and diluting the race. It's pretty brutal. She then beheads Caroline Becker in what turns out to mirror visually, thematically, and horrifically the same framing conflict at the beginning of the New Order, when you had to choose between Fergus and Wyatt. The directors of this game obviously have these connections in mind when crafting these scenes. Sigrun and a now armless Fergus find a way out of the situation with you now inhabiting Caroline's Dat Ihud armor. This is your primary form of movement. So this could be seen as sort of the motivation and framing narrative of the whole game. Sure, there's the overarching narrative of defeating the Nazis, but your personal motivation, and let me be clear when I say your, I mean you the player, not necessarily BJ's, is to see Frau Engel dead. Like super dead. Uber dead. She had my freaking blood boiling at this point. I wanted to kill her so much more than I did Death's Head, and he was pretty awful. And I think if we compare the two introduction execution scenes from the two games, we'll find that Caroline Becker's death carries a bit more impact. Now, there's the obvious difference of agency here. It's not like I got to choose Caroline's death. Maybe that is what makes it worse, but I think at its core it's the fact that I got the opportunity to spend an entire game with Caroline and Fergus. At the beginning of the New Order, I had just met Fergus and Wyatt. Caroline's death signaled so much more to me. It signaled the loss of a leader in the Kreisau Circle. The leader, actually. It signaled the loss of a woman who literally had a shell of mystical armor to protect her. It shows how little will get in the way of a certain Nazi general who wants what she wants. It absolutely reminded me of what I was up against. A woman, an entire country, a war machine, who was clearly winning this war. As far as tone setters go, this one was loud and true. What it lacked in subtlety, it made up for in aggressive tendencies. A theme for this game, I'm afraid. After a reasonably filler mission dedicated to clearing out a hidden section of your submarine, which had Nazis who were broadcasting your position to Frau, the main hub area opens up to you, and you can feel free to visit your squad mates and explore as you please. The submarine is larger than the safe house in the first game, but it's a little more corridor-driven and can be kind of confusing. There's a great story here surrounding Max Haas in this area that plays out during the course of the game, as you slowly find out he may be smarter than you think.
Max Haas.
Check my head.
Max.
No.
Max.
No.
Max.
No.
Max.
No!
Max.
No!
Max.
No, you can't be, you stupid Goylem!
One thing that really bothered me at this point in the story is how apt the Resistance is to accept Sigrun as part of the ship. Yes, she proves herself as a Nazi defector by telling the crew about the Nazis held up in the ship, but I still am not sure that was enough to warrant full autonomy across the ship, especially because those Nazis were completely cut off from the Nazi war machine. Starving and despondent, those Nazis were going to be found eventually. It is not outside the realm of possibility that they were acceptable casualties for BJ to kill so that Sigrun could use them as a means to build trust between her and the Resistance, ordered by her mother. In fact, I was all but convinced this was the case with how absurdly quick she was included into the inner circle. She's just allowed to go anywhere and do anything, and even more concerning, she's a part of and encouraged to participate in team meetings about where and when the Resistance is going. Weird stuff from a game who is seemingly thematically consistent in painting the brush of all Nazis being monsters. And let me be clear, I like Sigrun as a character. I think she's necessary. It's the purely logical reading that gives me trouble. She has done nothing worth clearly saying she has totally dropped Nazism. She did not kill Frau Engel, she just sort of reluctantly unfollowed orders. Skepticism should be a top priority for the Resistance when thinking about this. Yes, I know they appeared skeptical and were sort of mean to her a couple of times, but that's not the level of skepticism I want here. I don't need them to kill her. I need them to see her as more of a prisoner of war rather than a part of the gang. The crew decides it's best to visit recently nuked New York City and meet up with a resistance group centralized on top of the Empire State Building. After perusing irradiated NYC, you meet up with Grace and Super Spesh, two of the new main characters in the game. Grace is an eccentric and motivated black woman who absolutely does not care about your feelings. Her partner in crime, Super Spesh, is an alien conspiracy-believing crazy man who actually felt like one of the most endearing characters in the whole story. These two are probably the most important new characters. You fight your way back to the ship with what remains of their resistance and decide the first plan of action of the new resistance. That plan of action? Start a revolution in the United States of America, to allow for a grassroots insurgency against the Nazi war machine. In order to get that plan underway, however, nuke the Oberkommando, the central location of most of the Nazi higher-ups. The train station to get there is in Roswell, New Mexico, home of maybe the most iconic scenes from the marketing material in the game.
Look at you people. Celebrating your own destruction.
Last week, shut the fucking front door!
As you can see, the Nazis have completely overwhelmed the entirety of the United States and its culture. The KKK has been elevated to a position of almost royalty here. Cultural iconography exists still, such as hot dogs and milkshakes, but it has been completely plagued by a disgusting authoritarianism, a bleak, putrid stench of white supremacy and anti-Semitism. It is truly a nightmare scenario, a disgusting alternate reality that is, and this might be its most terrifying trait, not unrealistic or hard to imagine. I mean, this is horror at its most condensed, concentrated level. More on this horror later. You meet up with Super Spesh and head towards the Oberkommando with a nuclear bomb in your backpack. You got it from your ship, actually, the submarine. You blow up the Oberkommando, and on your way home from the Gulf, you decide to stop by your childhood ranch. It's maybe not your best idea. This is one of the first real narrative-only driven missions in the whole series. You don't even fire a bullet. The mission is sort of a walking simulator where you visit certain memories from your childhood and see them play out in front of you. I loved this mission. It gives a much-needed break from the anger and abrasive loudness of the game. It also gives a good amount of context for BJ's stoic nature and seemingly suicidal toughness. More on that later, I know that gets old to hear. At the end of the mission, you find your dad waiting for you in the bedroom. He continues to berate BJ, even telling him that he sold out his mom to the Nazis. He deserves what he gets. Of course, though, your pops had to ruin your day at least one more time on his way out life's door. Frau Engel comes crashing in, alerted of your presence by your parent. What ensues is one of the cooler acts I've ever seen in a video game. Now, I will do my best to do it justice here, but at its core, you are shipped around the Nazi-occupied territories as an image of the end of their war on terrorism, a paradigm-shifting capture in the war against the revolting Americans. With BJ Terror Billy Blazkowicz captured, the proverbial head of the snake of revolution has been removed. It's a cool sequence, and it really contributes to that feeling mentioned before, that America has truly lost the war. You're fighting against an overwhelming enemy. There's no safe haven, no home to go back towards. This is the world's reality. It's spooky stuff. Super Spesh comes in as your lawyer and tries to get you out of the situation through an elaborate plan, but is shot in the back of the head. You are taken to court and sentenced to death in what visually might be the most terrifying and realistic depictions of the new American Nazi order as I have ever seen. Look at the art direction here, the way the courtroom looks, the contrast of the red flags burst when compared to the jet black Nazi armor, and how it's all framed in gold. These are the new world leaders. They're all-encompassing. You've lost. After by far the most difficult combat encounter being a dream, you are officially sentenced to death and sent out to the executioner, right on by the Lincoln, well, now Hitler, Memorial. If you will indulge me, please do. I love what happens here and how the game keeps you on your toes. This part blew me away and I would like to play it for you, despite how long it may take. I think it is masterfully directed and the sound design marries to it perfectly. Just watch.
You're breaking my heart.
The old and the weak are doomed.
Everyone in position. She's dropping it!
Hier ready, kinderlijk. We have less than 7 seconds. Okay, ready, steady, march, bombate. Drop it! I'm done, now! Hurry! We have 3 seconds! We need to give his brain oxygenated blood, or it will die.
Is he alive? Answer me, is he alive?
I'm afraid it's too late.
Oh no. No.
Brain activity!
I think this whole sequence is just so awesome. It fits so perfectly within the absurdity of the game. It's stretching the boundaries, but not obliterating them. This twist is foreshadowed quite a bit in the game via collectibles and Set Roth's cat-monkey hybrid. I didn't feel like this was a cop-out. I felt like it was an unexpected twist. So let's break it down. The first twist is, of course, that BJ is killed. Your crew has a history of bailing each other out at the last minute, and you also know that. So, well, there's more game to play. BJ can't die. It's dramatic irony. Of course that expectation is gone as quickly as BJ's head is. And the new thought is, how in the world are they going to overcome this? Can't say I expected tying BJ to a German super soldier's body. Crazy stuff, man. This part does force the question here, however. Why did the new Colossus shy away from a lot of the Ehud stuff seen much more oftenly in the New Order? Of course it still plays a role, but it's so much less important to the plot here. It seems like a gigantic asset to the Resistance, and to be honest, Set Roth might be the most important member of the entire Resistance. I know the Ehud is in the game and mentioned, but I wonder why it's not a fundamental to the game's story like it was in the new Colossus. Seems important. The story sequences are best in this game when they are progressing towards something. This is to say that when the story or the scene is moving quickly, my enjoyment goes up. Look at the way it splits the screen to get more of that information on there in a shorter period of time. And the transitions, I love them. I love the game's commitment to forward progress in its storytelling. If there's one thing for sure, the game isn't wasting too much of your time. For better or for worse. When you have your mind and body rejoined again, your next objective is to meet up with the Resistance in the ghettos of New Orleans. There's an insurgency building up there against some of the most oppressive and abusive Nazis. Upon arriving, you meet an eccentric Marxist by the name of Horton, and he spouts off some, well, interesting leftist views. We should absolutely interpret Horton in the same way we interpret Sigrun, which is to say that he represents a conflicting idea, a paradigmatic icon that should be compared to the other paradigmatic icons of the series. If we understand, like we mentioned earlier, that these characters are rooted in hyperbole, then we must understand that this Marxist, leftist, whatever you want to call it, character as the other side of the coin of political extremity. It's with this group of the resistance and your newfound physical faculties that you decide to set into motion what will ostensibly begin the revolution in the United States. The most important obstacle to preventing revolution is the very ship that Frau Engel occupies. It's a floating fortress, a mechanical monstrosity that can be anywhere and nowhere, kill you or capture you, and is most certainly emblematic of the Nazi authoritarianism insofar that it is all-encompassing, oppressive, and shrouded in a black, evil cloak of paint. In order to get to this ship, we first have to get the codes to take down the security system inside of Engel's ship. This is, of course, classic video game lengthening, but it can be excused because what results is one of the most absurd, unexpected, and patently kind of stupid scenes I've ever seen in a video game. The new Uber Commando, considering you blew the first one up, is on Venus, like the planet. The codes for the ship's security system can be found there. However will you get to Venus? You, BJ Blazkowicz, are 100% dead for everyone not in your resistance. The removal of one's head and the continuation of their life is understandably an incompatible logical connection. Thus, of course, the Nazis want to commemorate this astounding moment of victory over terrorism by making a movie out of it. In order to do this, someone must play the part of BJ, right? Someone who has his chiseled jaw and stoic demeanor, who can harness rage as much as nationalistic fervor. What better thespian for this role than, well, BJ? Well, the auditions for this role are being held at the Uber Commando in Venus. How helpful. You take the place of one of the actors intended to audition and shoot up to Venus in order to audition for this role. You meet with your actors and, well, this happens.
How am I supposed to remember this shit? I gotta write this down.
Places, quickly! Heil Hitler!
Heil Hitler!
Helene! Kommen Sie. Haben Sie das gesehen? Fremde in meinem Büro. Würden Sie mir bitte verraten, wer in Gottes Namen das ist?
Ja, es sind Schauspieler, mein Führer.
Schauspieler.
Diese Männer wollen...
So yeah, remember this is quite a long time after the war. Hitler is old and senile at this point. He can be seen pissing and puking and being overall nonsensical and destructive. You go through a neat interactive scene where you need to memorize your lines or try and decipher BJ's handwriting. Ultimately, you win the job and are given a cabin on the Uber Commando. Man, I just wish I could show off this whole scene. It really is a treat. You sneak away and get the codes and fly back to Earth. There's a sweet surprise party for BJ and a pretty great sequence of partying that goes down, which is a nice touch for those who are really invested in the characters and their relationships. The plan is set into action. Finally, we will get to see the results of all this preparation and setup and planning. We get to finally see the revolution and see our hard work pay off in amazing scenes of chaos and uprising. Right? BJ and Anya land on the ship and start working towards setting down the defense system. A lot of combat passes by and you're able to take over the ship. There's hardly anything stopping you from starting that highly anticipated, tantalizing, promised in the marketing revolution, is there? I can't wait. But first, we have the little problem of our favorite deformed face, Frau Engel. She's been shipping herself around the United States for talk shows and public appearances touting the destruction of Terror Billy and his insurgency. The narrative shifts to you, backstage at one of her national television appearances. You sneak in and do what needs to be done. It's brutal, let me tell you. I don't know how I feel about this. I'll talk about it later, but there is no boss fight here. I'm glad she was brutalized in the way she was, sure, but it is a bit of a step away from the early tropes of linear shooters that I actually really appreciated about the series in the first place. And the game ends, and I mean ends, with a call to action to all who are watching. I guess it's cool. Actually, it's not. It's not cool. It's too long. It's awkward. Grace far overstays her welcome. It's just so disappointing. There's no signal that you are ending the game. It's not obvious because, well, the game feels too short. It easily could have had more time. And the ending just sort of happens. There's no revolution that was promised, just an invitation to buy the third game and a cringy credits song. And it makes me sad after a thrilling and excellent score by Mick Gordon. He's maybe the best video game music writer out there right now. And no, I mean that seriously. This guy is incredible at connecting you, the player, to the character on screen. His ability to give the player a physiological reaction to the different tensions of the game is something that blows me away each time. He will literally signal to you when your heart should start racing and then make it race by a stellar hardcore influenced score. If he wants you to think, he will make you think. Sorry, Mick is just awesome. Okay, yeah, the ending, ugh. It left me with a sour taste in my mouth. It's unfortunate that my experience with this game has been colored so negatively by the ending, but it's just the truth. It was all set up, no payoff. The story would be a spectacular first 2/3 to a video game, but as it is now, it just isn't enough. There's just so much that implies continuation. Anya is so close to having her twins, for example. It seems so odd to me that they just ended it here. Like there was another reason they had to quit development and they just had to tie it up as is. And this theory isn't completely crazy, I promise. Even the last battle is just a pretty ramped up set piece. It introduces new enemies. It isn't even that difficult, and I will remind you that I played on the hardest difficulty. To add some context, and I can't show this because, copyright stuff, but I was watching a streamer play through the new Colossus, and he had just finished that last battle on top of the ship. Before continuing, he told his chat, "Okay guys, that will do it for tonight. We'll finish the game tomorrow," as if he didn't know that the game had maybe 10 minutes left to go, and absolutely no more content. It is bizarre to me how poorly the ending of this game is communicated. I mean, there's just no reason to believe that the game is going to end after this engagement. Furthermore, the cut to the ending scene feels so disconnected and poorly contextualized, which is not really a trend in this series. It's just sad stuff. And again, the worst offense might just be the lack of boss battle. I know that sounds petty, but man, it just seems like a pretty important staple to not only the series itself, but of the identity of old school linear shooters like this. I really hope this isn't a trend with the series. I hope the game doesn't decide to keep slowly distancing itself from what made it good. Because at its core, these are some of the most incredible sequences and ideas being put on screen right now. No one else is making games like this. So I hope Machine Games continues to choose to err on the side of what made their attempt at Wolfenstein great. There's a lot of obvious content from my previous video that I don't think I need to reiterate here. If you want, and I'm not being facetious here, read the comments under my last Wolfenstein video. There is a lot of interesting perspectives in there. I also got a lot of Nazi sympathizers, but I deleted those. I say this because I learned a lot. I still think my The New Order video holds up and represents my views accurately, but I learned a lot of different perspectives and I'm always open to different readings. I want to start my first reading of the game by looking at one of the new characters, Sigrun, Frau Engel's daughter and your new member of the ship. Sigrun's place in the story is important, and I generally like her character and seeing her develop from a scaredy cat to a woman who defends her aversion to Nazism. She is important because she raises interesting philosophical and, more importantly, moral questions about Nazism and the nature of evilness. Now let me back up here and frame this carefully, as it will be the basis for almost all of our readings of the game. In my comments, most of the pushback I got on my previous videos centered around this idea of all Nazis are evil, and I understand I am lacking some nuance here, but let me try and phrase it fairly, because this isn't my position. So a good shortening of the disagreement is that in Germany there were these young men caught up in the fervor and nationalistic desperation of the war that were simply, cogs in the German war machine. They weren't in the SS, they weren't committing genocide. They were young men defending their country from outside forces. I hope that's a fair, representation of the argument. I don't really know where I fall on this. I think I tend to disagree, but the point here is that Sigrun represents this more so than anyone in the series so far. She represents a question of evil that has to be asked. Is evil, or more specifically in this case Nazism, ingrained into the consciousness and very fiber of a person's being? Can Sigrun un-Nazi herself? How can you tell? Grace sort of infamously acts extremely rude to Sigrun, but can you really blame her? Is it really so unfair for Grace, a black woman, to feel a little skeptical and abrasive that Frau Engel's daughter is aboard? Frankly, she acts too fairly, in my opinion. Sigrun did not choose to excavate herself from Irene's womb. She did not choose to be a Nazi. She also knew that rebelling against her upbringing would bring her humiliation or death. Is she evil because she was a Nazi, or was she evil because of her deeds? And I think that's what Machine Games is really trying to unpack here, and I'm not sure that they are making a statement either way. They're making the players think about something that I think a lot of the lovers and the haters of this game have a lot to say about. Is Nazism a label or a state of being? Is it something that is thrown onto people unfairly? Is Sigrun deserving of this label? I hate being so esoteric like this, but I think that is very important and is the importance of Sigrun in this title. Machine Games is intimately concerned with identity and the way we interpret identity from actions. Sigrun might just be the ultimate conundrum, the philosophical hang-up that not one person can reconcile. We even see this with Anya in one side scene on the boat, as she is trying her best to justify Sigrun, but can't because she knew she was there for some of the most horrific actions of her mother, and she didn't do anything about it.
I've looked through your records. Lists upon lists of atrocities. The Yosemite Massacre, burning of the Baltimore Ghetto, Nashville.
Stop! I was just following my mother. I am not responsible. I did not commit any of those acts myself. If you don't trust me, then why don't you just kill me right now?
But you were there. You stood by and watched it all happen. And you did nothing to stop your mother.
She would have thought me weak. An embarrassment. I just...
What?
I just wanted her to be pleased with me.
Ugh. I'm nauseous now. And I don't know if it's the pregnancy or you.
There's this great book that really helped me get into this preferred area of study in philosophy, The Problem of Evil. It's written in 1992 by Christopher Browning called Ordinary Men. I'm not sure I fully agree with the book or with its methodology, but it's an incredible manifestation of this bizarre, cyst in the human nature. The book chronicles a reserve police battalion of ostensibly normal people who are not at all anti-Semitic, evidenced by their begging to be placed in another battalion. These men, if I may condense the book to a sentence, slaughtered Jewish women and children, all because they were placed within a group, a social order, and were given orders by an authority. The premise here is that if you are in a social situation with understood implicit hierarchies and expectations, there's hardly anything you will not do if commanded to, for fear of being ostracized from the group. It's human nature. This is, I think, a position that has been somewhat founded in science by this guy named Stanley Milgram. When we ask ourselves these questions about evil, we are dealing with a philosophical issue unsolved across the history of the human race. That's why I'm not coming in here with the answer. I'm coming in noting how Machine Games is encouraging you to think about this ideological conundrum. I'd encourage you to put your opinions on Sigrun in the comments. If you've seen my other videos, you know I will reply.
No, mister. And I'm not a Nazi. Not anymore.
Another new character kinda in the same vein is Grace. I don't have a lot to say about her, but I will defend her. Her crutch on obscenity is kind of annoying sometimes, but to ignore the context of her experience in this world is to ignore a lot of the reason she is as abrasive as she is. Her home was nuked, her country gave up to the Nazis and lifted up white supremacist groups as the upper class, and she has lived in isolation and fear for a long time. Sure, she's a fighter, but man, it's hard to blame her. I'll try and avoid donning my cat-eye glasses and blue hair here to say that the dislike for Grace is because she is a woman, but I'm not sure I can imagine people complaining about a man doing the same thing. She's an abused person in a world who has lifted up her abuser. She has little patience for people. She's a product of her environment, and she is exceptionally effective and calm in comparison to that environment. One of the biggest themes in this game is BJ's age. The phrase, "the old and the weak are doomed," is important in this game, and parroted oftenly throughout. How should we understand BJ's old age? It's a reminder of BJ's purpose on this planet. Oftentimes we are bogged down so heavily by the philosophy of these games that we forget that BJ is trying to end the lives of as many Nazis as he can before his life ends. At the end of the New Order, he was ready to die. He killed Death's Head, he planted the nuke, and it was okay. Now, however, he has kids on the way. 2 to be precise. Has BJ's priorities shifted? Does he want to be a father now? To be honest, I think his priorities have not shifted. This sounds controversial, but I do not think that the introduction of potential offspring changes things for BJ. I think this for a couple of reasons. First, he is no less inclined to put himself on the line for the cause. At no point does he say, hey guys, I'm going to, sit this one out because I'm probably not going to survive going to the Nazi base on planet Venus and making it back. And I want to be there for my kids. Furthermore, I don't think his priorities have changed in the sense that his main goal is still killing as many Nazis as possible. I do think, though, that his reasoning for that goal is more specific to his children than it was before, which might end up motivating him even further to kill more Nazis. He says, I'll be damned if I raise my kids in a world owned by these Nazi assholes, and I'm inclined to believe he will get the job done. Finally, there's the ever-present theme of fatherhood and family in this game. It's no coincidence that the game that has BJ dealing with fatherhood is the same one where he is dealing with his father. This game should absolutely be seen as an Oedipal tragedy, one that can be transposed onto the Greek tragedy Oedipus Rex. Where that tragedy deals with the uncomfortable realities of fate and free will, so too does the New Colossus. Where Oedipus lost his eyes, BJ lost his legs. Where Oedipus laments his unfortunate scenario to the prophet Tiresias, BJ constantly calls to his angel Caroline. I love how this game keeps a thematic consistency across its narrative in regards to this fatherhood stuff. I love how as a kid, BJ is disciplined for ruining his family name by liking and hanging out with the black woman outside their house. Then when you meet him in the house years later, he is disciplining you, just like you're a child, because you are ruining his name in the Nazi world by being Terror Billy. It's such a cool mirroring of the relationship of the two. Then, of course, there's the fact his lover is a Polish woman who mirrors pretty much the same exact matriarch of comfort that BJ's mom was. There is no way, in my opinion at least, that Machine Games begins the game with BJ's mom's face in your frame without this ancient tragedy being in their mind. Our reading of BJ as Oedipus actually makes a lot of sense in terms of his sense of impending doom. BJ is constantly dealing with his mortality throughout the entire game. It's a defining aspect to his experience and constantly colors the way that he interprets the world. This man, this fearless destroyer of evil, is so afraid of confronting Anya about his impending death that he can't even get himself to tell her. When they do have the conversation, it allows for one of the more special and intimate scenes the story has to offer. Anya knows BJ. Anya knows that the circumstances that BJ has been placed in far outweigh the desires to have a normal relationship. Don't you just love how Anya doesn't say a word to BJ when he signs up for these absurd missions, like entering a nuclear-radiated Nazi-infested NYC? She just begins on the battle plan and how to make the process work. She's incredible. A true fighter who knows what is at stake is so much larger than her and BJ's relationship. I just think Anya is great and doesn't get nearly enough screen time in the New Colossus. The irony, of course, to this whole mortality and old age theme is that BJ does die. This quasi-prophecy of the old and the weak are doomed is actually true. Just think about it. Caroline Becker, disabled and getting up there in age, dead. BJ, dead. Irene, dead. Hitler, well, I'm sure his time is coming. The prophecy that BJ repeats isn't actually far from the truth, as much as the game seems to fight against it. I understand BJ does not die. You know what I mean, though. He loses his head and certainly is morphed with someone who is neither old nor weak. The old and the weak BJ is absolutely dead. I've had a number of conversations with people about this game, and it's about its role in a wider cultural context. I've had conversations about Nazism, about violence, about absurdity, about evil, and about how all of that relates to video games. None more interesting and focused than a conversation I had about Adolf Hitler and the simple, broad premise of including him in a video game like this. Appeals to constitutional rights and free expression aside, which are obvious and true, of course, and should allow for games like this to exist, how should we view Machine Games' portrayal of Hitler and even of this alternate reality? Is it sensitive? I'm thinking not. Is it funny? I was laughing. I say this because I invited someone into the room while I was playing it, and it played out a little something like this. I said, hey, come in here. I'm doing this acting tryout thing for literally Hitler. Hitler is in this game? I thought it was like fake. Yeah, isn't that hilarious? Look, I don't know my lines, and he shoots me. Isn't that funny? I guess. Then they left. I asked what was wrong, and she said that the whole thing makes her uncomfortable, that she likes the idea of this game, but she could never play it. It's too scary, too real. And my girlfriend Allie, the person that came in, she might be the smartest person I've ever met. She makes me look like an imbecile sometimes. She's no stranger to video games either. Her favorite games are linear shooters that take place in artistic, scary, alternate realities. Those games are, of course, Bioshock 1 and Infinite and Fallout New Vegas. To her, the introduction of Hitler was just a bridge too far, a topic that video games should look elsewhere for. It really got me thinking, too, because at first I was like, oh, come on, it's fake, it's absurd, look at this game, it's ridiculous. But then I kind of started to think about it. That's precisely the problem. Adolf is a joke, a wretched pile of compost reduced to senile shock value. What is the point? You're making an evil man a laughingstock. It really is something to think about. I think Death's Head from the previous game was an interesting and maybe more appropriate take on it. Not only did he represent Hitler in a way, but he portrayed a more underrepresented side of the Nazi war machine, being its incredible scientists. But he was enough of a departure from reality that it strayed far enough from the insensitive design. It really highlights the problem with this game, maybe my biggest problem, and it's one I've been mentioning. This game is just sort of a comedy. The New Order was sort of absurdly nuanced. This game is just absurd. The entire second half, after the decapitation of our protagonist, it just turns to comedy schlock where nothing can be said without it being followed by a joke. And look, I'm obviously not offended or bothered by Hitler being in my game, but it is not hard for me to imagine someone being so. My problem is how the writing has seemed to abandon the type of humor that made the previous game great and funny for a juvenile comedy that lacks the same sort of writing skill. It's something to stew about. Okay, let's talk about that cultural context. So this game got quite the marketing boost by a couple of less than subtle tweets, such as tweets that say, "These are not fine people," or to "make America Nazi-free again." Okay, these are obviously about the United States President Donald Trump. They are also obviously clever marketing ploys that absolutely worked. How should we interpret them, and are they consistent in the game? This is an area of subjectivity, I'm afraid. I have to say, though, that this overt posturing towards a certain narrative, it kind of turned me off from the game for a bit. I mean, I guess I liked the message. I thought it was brave, and I thought the beauty of the previous Wolfenstein games was how they married these subtleties with aggressive expletives. Now, I'm afraid that the beauty has been forfeited for an obviously sort of capitalist utilitarian fire starter. Sure, I mean, I guess they're not wrong. I mean, in that if you're getting mad at a game about killing Nazis, well, yeah. But it's the all-in commitment that gets me down. The reluctance to let the game speak for itself in what is already an overt commentary on authoritarianism. And here's the biggest problem about it all. The previous game was a good overt commentary on authoritarianism. It always showed, rarely told. It was a convincing apocalyptia, a realistic portrayal of the possibilities of Axis victory in Europe. The new Colossus, however, can't decide if it is that same sort of window into authoritarianism or if it's a comedy masked in something edgy. For example, in the game, the KKK, this was a hugely risky thing for machine games to include in their game, but it makes sense. The hooded inbreds were seen in the marketing material and advertised as an integral part to the world building of Nazi-occupied America. I'm pretty sure I saw them 2 times in the main story of the game, and one of those times they were portrayed as bumbling buffoons. In the previous game, they would have been seen as evil but at least competent enemies in the face of the freedom-loving people. Even when I got laughs, it felt like the Wolfenstein I knew would have had the Nazis be as scary as they were sources for cathartic slaughter. Even when I admittedly was laughing pretty hard, the game establishes this irreverence towards the Nazis early on with an idiotic Nazi who dances across Set Roth's trap that obviously obliterates those who pass through. I mean, it was a funny scene, but it's just out of touch with the line the game establishes itself on. This game is veering on power fantasy, on a catharsis based on just the idea of white supremacist slaughter, not the sort of rhetorical mastery of the previous game in which it was more about facing against overwhelming odds, against something more than just the sheer shock of Nazism, of the relationships built in a world where there might not be an answer to the injustice. It's just frustrating. BJ was set up to face up against an overwhelming black shroud, a total police state. Instead, the game just sort of wastes the setting. Like NYC, how is that resistance even still up there on top of the state building? Where are they getting fresh water? The place is heavily irradiated. The Nazis didn't take long to get up there when we were fighting. In the ghettos of New Orleans, it just blew by. Remember the Holocaust sequences in the previous game? How it was as jarring as it was revealing? The new Colossus just decided to turn up the hyperbole to 11 and make as many characters with as many ridiculous extremities. Set Roth, Fergus, and even Anya to a degree. They were all as depressed as they were sources for humor in the previous game. In this one, they are just absurd exaggerations of themselves. And of course, this is all topped off at the end of the game by Anya flying naked through blood-soaked Nazi viscera, her pregnant belly exposed to the camera as BJ looks on in astonishment. Thematically, Wolfenstein The New Order was this nerve agent. It was a slow burn, a still dangerous weapon of brain destruction that permeates into the brain and slowly builds up and expands upon itself. Wolfenstein The New Colossus is more like a hand grenade, a sudden explosion, a quick experience that lacks a lot of the subtleties found in those nerve agents.
So what's it gonna be? You hillbilly, degenerate moonshiner, Bolshevik cowards, goddamn traitors.
I think people sometimes forget that Wolfenstein is a stealth game, just like its predecessors. Just because id Software helped does not mean that it is the same action philosophy as Doom or Quake. Wolfenstein is based on stealth playgrounds designed to be arenas with multiple entrances, flanks, and lines of sight. While the game does try to contextualize the arenas in terms of the location you are in, gameplay should always prevail, right? And this brings me into sort of my first critique of the new Colossus' approach to the combat arenas. Some of them aren't adequately suited for the game being played. A lot of them are made significantly more difficult by virtue of their design, not their enemies or their items. And if you've played the game, then you know exactly what arena I might be referencing here. By far the hardest part of the game was a courtroom scenario in which, in a dream state, you bust out of your shackles and into a wide open room in which the only cover available to you is as fragile as your crippled legs. Hunkering down next to the wood panels is as useful as Fergus's arm, which is to say not very useful at all. It's an octagon of your demise, a stage fit for only the most masochistic pain seekers. Fighting in this area on the hardest difficulty in the game was an assessment of my patience, and it provided a thoroughly humble look into my own being, a sort of metacognitive question of, what the hell am I doing with my life? The design of this room is far too, well, it's like a courtroom. It's too much like a courtroom to be a useful room for player flow and even fun. These linear games should be predicated on polish in their game design, especially when the game runs just under 11 hours. Another example was a guard room with a giant elevator inside. After taking out one officer, you have to send down an elevator and then get on it so that you can access the next officer. The problem is, it is next to impossible to get on that elevator without alerting the guards. And so the alarms go off the entire time you are going up the elevator. Enemies will be on the platform with you, flanking you from all sides, and the stage is far too small for BJ's failing health and lack of damage. And it's not just because of the difficulty, because I'm sure that you are thinking this is my fault for choosing that difficulty. I played through these areas on the average normal difficulty as well and found them frustratingly difficult. The problem is the spike. It's that the game isn't consistent in its difficulty. And you see, that's the thing with the hit scan weaponry. It's frustrating difficulty, not meaningful, learnable difficulty. Sometimes, especially in the courtroom scene, it comes down to RNG. And this was actually evidenced when I would load a save right before I was about to die. Sometimes when I would load the save, I would be hit immediately and die within a second. Other times I would live for longer. There is no method to the madness here. Sometimes the Nazis will hit you, sometimes they won't. On the hardest difficulty, I found I would string together a couple unlucky RNG hits and just be dropped before I could even realize I was being shot. Pair this with the abysmal signaling of BJ taking damage, and you have a frustrating recipe for hit scan annoyance. Most of the core gameplay ideas and loops haven't changed, however. And if you want a more comprehensive analysis, watch my previous video where I delve into the flowchart of a Wolfenstein level. Halfway through the game, after the decapitation, you are given a new body which increases your health from 50 to 100. It's an interesting and cool way of contextualizing renewed strength into gameplay. The theme of the old and the weak are doomed is actually manifested a bit here in the repeated frustration of death because of your low health. Furthermore, the guns are just samey and lack a lot of the variety that was found in the previous game. I like the shotgun in this one, as it really fit in with the over-the-top industrialization and efficiency that German engineering was so proud of. The two full auto weapons were so similar in nature that they became far and away the most effective means of supremacist slaughter that it was actually a hindrance to really use much else. And also, the main menu is lame. I know it's petty, but it's true, sue me. Not really any boss battles. That also made me sad. Game is too short, and the Venus mission doesn't take enough advantage of being on Venus. Okay, you guys know I'm not much of a gameplay guy. The game is a linear FPS that, if you aren't using a mouse and keyboard, good freaking luck on anything but the easiest difficulty. The meat of this title is what it says about its characters and philosophy, not really about its corridors and stealth arenas. I don't think I've ever given a review score in any of these analysis videos. I think it is clear that I liked the game, but did not like it as much as The New Order. To me, this is a $40 game. It's too short to be full price, and it's too good to be ignored for too long. This game is more of an experience than a lot of games that you will play this year, but if you're looking to get involved with a video game and not a movie, then there are actually other options for $60. I kind of like this review structure, actually. I might keep it. $40 game. I'd like to thank all of the people that come in and leave interesting and insightful comments. It means a lot to see a lot of the same faces in the comments, so that's actually really cool of you guys. Leave a comment if you've made it this far. I usually take time to talk about the channel here. Every video I make is sort of one less video I can make in the future. I know that sounds kind of dumb, but as I near certain points in my life, this hobby becomes more difficult. And that is what it is. It's a hobby. I'm not one of those guys you probably also watch if you found my channel. I'm not making money. I don't have a Patreon, and that's fine. I like doing this. I just need to be aware that at some point, barring a complete shift in the trajectory of the channel viewership-wise, I will be making less and less content. That being said, I have some more videos I will almost certainly be making. This includes Red Dead Redemption, and that's for certain. I'd like to cover the new Call of Duty. I know that's weird, but I feel like it's actually sort of ripe for some of the interesting discussion on video games that we like to do around here. Furthermore, I'm sort of passively working on this complete big project. It's a series retrospective on Assassin's Creed. And I know they aren't everyone's favorite games, but bear with me on this one. I'm serious. They have so much to unpack in the ways of philosophy and narrative. I want to actually go through each of those games and sort of uncover what each of them are trying to say about free will and being and yada yada. The way I'm structuring it now will be so comprehensive it'll actually make my head spin. It will quite literally be the Book of Assassin's Creed, where I'll go in and talk about each sequence in order and unpack how they interact in meaningful ways. I will work on this as long as I am working on normal analyses over the next couple of months. I don't even know if I'm going to do it. Let me know how you feel. It would be like 6 hours long or something. It would be the magnum opus of my nerdy video game analyses. Above all, I'm doing this for fun, so I'll probably keep doing it anyway. It's just hard to tell. I think those games get fairly criticized, but they're still kind of cool. But again, thank you all so much for watching, and please, if you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comments or by liking the video. If you didn't, that's fine too. Let me know. I can only improve. Other than that, I appreciate you sinking in the time. I will see you all in the next video.